We were fortunate to come at another time. I was born in 1960. So when I was born, I had Negro on my birth certificate. And civil rights was 1965. I was 5 years old. Malcolm X was killed in 1965. I remember that. Dr. Martin Luther King was killed in 1968. I was 8 years old. Vietnam War was from 1963 all the way to 1971. I remember that very clearly. I wrote Black Steel in the Hour of Chaos after my uncle actually had an officer come to the house, hand him a letter and say he had to be drafted into the Vietnam War. He opened the letter and just dropped it on the table, and it just graduated high school. So these are things that's already inside me. As well as the music, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud by James Brown. It said that we black, we not colored, we not Negro, we black. We speak to the world because it's how we look. Curtis Mayfield, always spoke inspiration. These are already music in the house. So it's already inside me. So when rap music came out later on, you speak a lot of words. You speak where you come from and what you know. So, I mean, if you're gonna say a lot, say what you know. So that's how that whole, people are like, well, you're political, but no, this is where I come from because this is what's inside me. When rap records came out, it just like kind of clicked to me. I was like, wow, rap records, that means covers, that means graphics. I could kind of like use my graphics to work in the art department at a record company if records get bigger. And so that actually made me get back in school and finish out school because I wanted to actually be, in the art department of a record company making record covers and stuff like that. And that pushed me through school. And I love the fact that you can apply your art to music. Now, I wasn't a big graffiti fan. I would be in the city riding the train to work, and I would look at half of the graffiti and say, no, that shit is whack. And that's what really bit me. To make a long story short, the technical aspect of what DJs were bringing to the music, that's really what started hip hop. The curiosity of taking something that was given to you as a recording and flipping it for the listener or for the audience, whether it be at a party, whether it be on a tape. I mean, cassette tapes were just new they were developed in '64, but when they hit the hood with low expensive players, when people were able to listen to the radio station and make pause tapes. That's the beginning of hip hop, and that's why there's no secret that the Holy Trinity founders of hip hop are Kool Herc, Africa Bambaataa, the Master of Records, and Grandmaster Flash.
Chuck D, the rap renegade whose powerhouse baritone has guided Public Enemy for over 3 decades, has passionately worked to bring conscious hip-hop to the mainstream.
The group's debut album, 1987's Yo, Bum Rush the Show, immediately cemented them as icons who always managed to have their sights set on the cultural zeitgeist, regardless of how turbulent it becomes. Chuck D describes Public Enemy's first album, "We happened to come with an album right out of the box that was kind of unprecedented, and it was with a major system for a label that was experimental called Def Jam. Def Jam in the beginning was an experiment. It was not a given, so they wanted to sell albums. We came out like a rock act that had albums before we had a hot single on the streets. Public Enemy #1 was our first single, but that came out at the same time the album came out."
You take the bus to Jamaica, you take the E and F train, you're in the city. So the thing about Long Island is that everybody from the city had moved to Long Island. So Nassau County was the only place, and Suffolk County was the only place where you had everybody from every area of New York City. Before that, people in Brooklyn had no reason to go to the Bronx. We wanted to be able to take and make the new arrangement to the sounds. Because we had a knowledge of records and we had a respect for the records and we had a respect for the different genres, our thing was trying to make it all work. And then we didn't like where R&B was in the middle of the 80s. We just thought that the worst thing that ever happened to R&B is they just started to use synthesizers. Synthesizers started to use the musician as opposed to Stevie Wonder would pimp the hell out of a synthesizer. But a synthesizer started to use, and drum machines started to use the producer. So you would just have this corny ass, just like corny ass sounds coming out of the 80s that we wanted to rebel against. So our whole goal was like, we're going to destroy the music business concept of music with music. Set off some kind of zone inside the average b-boy that they could not dispute, and that was Public Enemy #1, which was a tape that I made for WBAU in '84 that automatically set fire, which made Rick Rubin want to sign me in the first place. And our thing was not make music, we're gonna make unmusic, because we knew it was the hot rap records. We knew Run DMC, the Kings, coming off the Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5, so we knew all the records that were out at the time. So in order for me to make something, I wanted to make something that actually stood out. When I made Public Enemy #1 at the end of 1984 as a WBAU promo tape, I lived in Roosevelt, still to this day, next to a busy street. So we would try to we would monitor the radio show based on how many people wanted to make tapes from the radio show. So, when a car goes by, you can usually hear a car go boom, boom, boom. It could be anything. But I started to use noise because I wanted to be able to take a real good survey. So when I noticed when I did Public Enemy #1, when a car went by and we knew that it was hot, that we were doing on the radio, a car would go by with the beat. We're gonna make some noise by bringing the noise, and we're gonna make different records, and we're gonna make some abrasive records. And the whole goal was make some music that your girlfriend's gonna hate.
The Black Power influence became fully realized on Public Enemy's second album, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, released in 1988, with pro-Nation of Islam lyrics like, "The follower of Farrakhan, don't tell me that you understand until you hear the man." The album stirred controversy throughout the United States.
Takes a Nation of Millions sonically comes off the heels of us doing Rebel Without a Pause at 102 beats per minute, somewhere in that range. And then and beats per minute meant a lot to us because of DJs. So we always went on BPMs, and Keith and Hank had digital Panasonic turntables. So beats per minute always meant something to us. Bring the Noise was 109 beats per minute at the end of 1987 for Less Than Zero soundtrack. That was like going into light speed. And so the challenge was to be able to perform it and get on it. And now we had faster songs like It's Like That, 125 beats per minute, but it was a different double speed, so to speak. But 109 was like rap on it, take the fast speed, ride it like a saddle, and get this crowd throttled up right in the middle of the days of crack. 112, 110, 113 beats per minute was the songs on It Takes a Nation. And so that's sonically, and what it said is basically said all the things that we grew up with in the 60s and 70s. Taking voices, there's many voices on there from the 60s and the 70s that were forgotten in the 80s. I remember Hank and I were hanging a flyer on a pole in the 80s, 1985, and we used Malcolm X looking out the wall, outside the window with his carbine rifle defending his house, which is a famous shot that was used later on by KRS-One on My Philosophy. And this guy came by and said, "Who's this Malcolm the 10th?" Which made me and Hank say, "Shit, man, we need to let these people in the 80s know in the middle of Reagan and Bush where we come from, because that was just forgotten, and that was only 10 to 15 years prior." Look, call the group Public Enemy. Man, and then we started putting appendages of what it means. public enemy since the Constitution of the United States said black people was 3/5 of a human being. Right. And the public looks at it as being the sacred document.
Chuck goes on to say, then we must be the enemy. What was the gist behind do the right thing, fight the power?
It doesn't happen without Spike Lee. It's, just to make a long story short and a short one shorter, Spike Lee was the portal that we never had. I mean, our first record that made a movie was actually The Tougher Than Leather by Run DMC. And I remember just bugging out, hearing like it was Terminator X to the Edge of Panic was in there during the scene where DMC has the headphones on. I was like, wow. And we kind of like said, you know what? Radio's never gonna play us. What other portals can we actually get our music into? Which holds true for us to this day that, yeah, we love radio, we're from radio. As a matter of fact, we're competitive against what we call stupid radio. We want to destroy it. In 89, Spike says, I got a movie. He came to us in 88, said, I need an anthem. The thing that made Fight the Power work and Do the Right Thing was not that it was in Do the Right Thing. Spike had it played 1 trillion times. I'm like, who does that? Meaning that, yeah, we had a core following that expected like hard, unlistenable music we were cool with. In fact, the Power was a little bit mainstream. It was funky, it was danceable, it was nice. Wasn't one of our records.
So there you have it. In his own words, Chuck D, the public enemy, in Cultural Sonic Ambassadors. My name is Gary Harrison. I thank you for watching. And I thank you for listening. Stay tuned, and I'll catch you on the next one.
People have been disenfranchised for a long time. Do you love the people that it comes from? And, initially it's that jump back, wow, what does that got to do with it? But I tell people all the time, if you don't love the people from which it came from, who evolved and created it out of being voiceless to have a voice, then you gotta, kind of look at the script again and say whether you love it or not. And if you do love it, how are you going to support it and support the voices that are screaming and crying out and spitting on these microphones and on these records?